Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on why Busch Beer should roll out a seasonal line of fall and winter products. This will be a marketing analysis by Austin Polina, Carter Harris, Emily Miles, and Nick Caldwell. Here's our agenda for our presentation. As you can see, we'll cover everything from what they should offer to why, the data that we've used to come to these conclusions, and more. All right, first off, let's start out with our motivation and the research problem itself. First off, what was our motivation for doing this project in the first place? Well, originally this wasn't actually any of our idea, but we quickly latched onto it when we considered the possibilities that it offered. First off, the transition to fall sparked our interest in the lack of major seasonal offerings around this time for beers. As many of you have seen, there's all sorts of fall products available right now, from drinks to candies, foods, and clothing, as well as innumerable craft brew options that cater to the specific season of the year. Additionally, there are holidays, sports events, and more that offer interesting marketing opportunities and chances for Busch to perhaps collaborate or do some different sorts of tie-in beverages with the various events. Therefore, we saw Busch as an interesting option based on their well-known brand and current lack of similar products. So, the rise of seasonal beers. Seasonal beers have become extremely popular of late, with the recent craft brew craze exploding around the nation and becoming very common in the average supermarket, from small to medium-sized breweries. For instance, offerings such as Sam Adams Oktoberfest and a whole variety of different options by Boulevard, one of which is the Nutcracker Winter Warmer Ale that you see right here. However, for now, they're still very uncommon with major companies. There are practically no major fall or winter offerings from large nationwide distributors. Therefore, this seems to be a great opportunity for Busch to take it nationwide. However, right now there's a pretty significant gap in Busch's current offerings. Right now, Busch has a remarkably limited product line, with only 5 main offerings, along with the unusual dog beer that we won't really count. This is lower than many competing brands, even those within Anheuser-Busch itself. For instance, Budweiser, Bud Light combined have 11, but still no real fall or winter seasonal offerings. Busch itself has absolutely no seasonal offerings whatsoever for any season of the year, really, meaning that there's certainly room for them to expand their product line and add some diversity to their current offerings. The opportunity at hand for Busch. Right now, Busch has a great name recognition and a dedicated customer base across the country. We believe that they could easily spend some of this social capital bringing new seasonal beers to a segment of the population that is probably not shopping for craft brews on the regular. We believe that they could test the waters with a short-term Thanksgiving or Christmas special next year, then expand on that to more options if it's a success. This is relatively untested waters for a major brewery, however, so we believe that some marketing research and analysis ahead of time is highly warranted to make sure that this will be an effective and profitable strategy for them to take.
Situational analysis and research design. Going back to the beginning, the history of Busch beer started in the 1850s in St. Louis as Anheuser-Busch. Later, in 1955, Busch branched from the parent company as Busch Bavarian, which was the company's first beer since Prohibition. Later, they changed the name in 1979 to Busch Beer. Since its beginning, Busch Beer has marketed its beer to be smooth and light and for the great outdoors. In 2006, Busch launched a camo can to market specifically to the outdoorsman. However, has since continued to market through different can designs. Busch Light Apple has continued the can branding by decorating the cans with red apples. This campaign is interactive with their audiences by encouraging the beer drinkers to buy the Busch Light apple and post a picture of the case of beer. By doing so, the first 1,000 posters receive money to buy more cases. The top competitors for Busch are Molson Coors Brewing Company, Constellation Brands, and Heineken International. In order to compete, Busch needs to have a higher quality of taste while providing a lower price. Also, in today's world, companies that are able to interact with their target demographic tend to have higher sales. After analyzation, beer sales typically increase during the holiday seasons. Also, there have been spikes in alcoholic sales, which is a great opportunity to release exclusive seasonal flavors. For our primary data, we sent out a SurveyMonkey that was made up of 10 questions regarding beer habits and preferences. In turn, we received 40 responses that we then paired with our secondary data. We found primary data to be important because it is tailored to our project and it helped to guide our research. The secondary data we found provided a lot of information over a wide variety of beer reviews. This was helpful to fill in the gaps where we needed more data. The responses in the dataset were over 1.5 million, where the primary data only provided 40. Using this information, we created a linear regression in R that compared each consumer's review over specific beers.
As Emily mentioned, we will now go into the data collection and sampling. As she mentioned, we surveyed and interviewed 40 individuals to gather their perspectives, interests, and satisfaction levels associated with previous beer experiences and future expectations. 27 respondents, as you can see in the first graph, or 67% of the interviewees, stated they regularly consume a beer, and the majority of individuals who drink on a weekly basis. So roughly 20% of those participants drink an average of 10 or more drinks per week. So the target market is there. The next interview question on the left side, depicts the beverages consumers drink on a regular basis when given an option. Budweiser, specifically the can, and Natural Light was the most consumed, but Busch was right on their heels. And of the sample data, 85% of participants drank Busch. On this graph, we average on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being greatly disliked and 5 being greatly enjoyed, the user's experiences with Busch brand in the past. On average, the consumer preference of Busch beer was uniformly distributed, but there was a strong tendency for individuals to divulge in seasonal selections, as you can see on the right-hand side. Roughly 80% of individuals enjoy a seasonal brand. Within this graph as well, we measured it on a scale from 1 to 5, seeing what the interest would be in a fall or a winter seasoned beer. As you can tell, there's a little bit more of a preference towards something fall and winter flavored. With this, we also determined that the purchasing price, the average response for a seasonal flavored bottled 6-pack was roughly around $11.
We can now move on to our data analysis methods and results. Now that we have looked over our primary data and aggregated numbers, we can also move on to our secondary data resources. As we mentioned earlier, we were able to find a data set online from beeradvocates.com that contained about 1.5 million rows of data. We were then able to pull this data into R to run a linear regression, which is what can be seen here. If we look at the first output on the page, we can see that the model had an R-squared value of about 67%. This value isn't necessarily great, but it's not awful either, so we can definitely use the model for our research. So if we actually look over the numbers that are presented in our linear regression, we can definitely see how some of these coefficients can be brought into our project and help our research overall. So we can see from the top output again that customers were reviewing our beers over aroma, appearance, palate, taste, and then the data set also included the alcohol content in the beer as well. If we look at the bottom output, we can also see how the beers were rated by the beer type. We can see how those coefficients might be able to help us in terms of us finding out which types of beers we might want to brew. Do we want to brew a red ale, a red lager, or even like a blonde ale? So we can definitely see how this data could help us with our research and help us signify and find out which type of beers we're going to want to brew. If we move on to this graph from the St. Louis Fed, we decided to include this just because of the seasonality portion. Our project is trying to find out whether or not Busch should brew a seasonal beer and what season they should brew in. And this graph clearly demonstrates that there's a seasonal trend when it comes to beer, wine, and liquor sales over the course of the year. We decided to include this graph because if we can see from the beginning of the year to the end, as the year goes on, beer sales, wine and liquor sales go and increase, and then eventually they take off in the winter. So again, if we use this and let it help us in our research and guide our research, we can see that we might want to target these specific times of the year in order to target a seasonal beer. So really overall, from our output and from the graph from the Fed, we can see a couple different things. One, we can see that the amber red lagers, the blonde ales, the pale lagers, and the pale wheat ales are going to be our most popular beer types. So we might want to target these beer types whenever we try to brew our seasonal beer. We can also see that the beers that have the higher alcohol content tend to lead to lower ratings. We can see this from the negative coefficient that was on our output, and so we might want to stick between that sweet spot of maybe not too little of alcohol, but also not too much. And then also from our graph from the Fed again, we can see that beer and liquor sales increase during the fall and winter months of the year, so we might want to target these specific seasons when we try to brew our seasonal beer.
Well, what are the implications and the recommendations that we would have for this and for Busch? After analyzing the data and diagnosing the sample primary data and the secondary data through our linear regressions, we discovered the most preferred flavors to be Santa flavor, an enticing splash of Christmas spirit, and cinnamon apple, the classic fall favorite. Priced at $3.99 per bottle and $11.99 per six-pack, and served at a 3 to 5% alcohol by volume content, these two beverage options would not only be immense contributors to Busch's bottom line, but would also further illustrate Busch's innovation, unique flavoring, and consistent reliability.
So really the implications of this project are pretty tremendous. According to online resources, seasonal beers account for about 14% of craft beer sales. So we know that if we brew a seasonal beer, that it's going to have a significant impact on our sales within the company, and it could potentially launch us into the future. Having a seasonal beer will also allow us to remain competitive. We're always looking as a company, as these microbreweries are starting to spread up all over the country, we're looking at ways to stay competitive. And although Anheuser-Busch is a national domestic brand, we can still find different types of beers and find ways to be different, and a seasonal beer would definitely do this for us. And then a seasonal beer could potentially also increase our brand awareness. If people see our seasonal beers and they want to buy them, chances are they might also buy, a six-pack of just our normal beers that we normally sell. And so really just the seasonal beer could also, again, increase that brand awareness that we're looking for as well.
Listed are our references. Thank you.